This podcast was brought to you in association with Bloomsbury India.
Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan Podcast. Today we have with us an supremely interesting author, Mira Sethi. Mira, after being born in Lahore, went on to study in the US and has worked as a books editor at the Wall Street Journal. But she's also a regular on mainstream Pakistani drama series on television. Balancing this life between Karachi, San Francisco, and Lahore, she regularly writes op eds for major publications and has come out with a debut book. Are you enjoying a collection of lovely short stories, which frankly are absolutely enamoring and have a very unique way of writing, particularly the way she ends stories. She has a way of writing stories and narrating them that leaves you thinking and pondering and wondering, which is what any good fiction writer should do. Without wasting a moment, here's the interview. Hi, Mira. Welcome to the Kitabi Karwan Podcast. I'm so glad to have you on my podcast today. Before we get into the questions about your book, I have a cliched question which I ask almost every guest who comes on the podcast. And particularly, it will be very interesting to ask you because you have been a public personality outside your life as an author as well, right? Tell us something about you which you know the you've hidden from the internet or what we can't find from the blurb of your book, because I like to know that there are authors have some hidden sides to them which probably add more to a reader's perception or their enjoyment of the book.
So first of all, Siddharth, thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight to be here, and it's such a delight to be speaking to somebody across the border. I was last in India in 2015, and it's been a while, and so मेरी एक ये ख्वाहिश है और एक उम्मीद है, and that this is very much sort of a hope I have that very soon we will be able to travel to each other's countries and meet each other,
Yes.
and all of us in person. So what? It depends on how. I mean, there are so many dramatic things that people don't know about people. I don't know if I should share. Um, a kind of what is the one thing about me that no one knows? थोड़ी मुझे इसमें in terms of like what hobbies I have or what?
Um, um, I don't know, something that might surprise people about you. Something, I'll give you an example. So,
Okay.
in my last episode, I had the former National Security Advisor of India, Shiv Shankar Menon, on my podcast. And his fact was that he's a failed musician and he used to jam during his IS days with the former election commissioner of India, which just blew everyone's mind because that's two people you don't really imagine rocking out to their own instruments with. So something like that was just a heads up, but something that can.
So, okay, so I was a really bad student. I was only good at writing essays, and I had taken physics
Hmm.
for my GCSEs in Lahore, and I was such a bad student that my teacher came up to me, the physics teacher came up to me, and he said, "के बेटा आप इस subject को drop कर दें, क्योंकि you are making a mockery of the subject because I was so bad." Like I think once, and I will say this on the record, I think I got like 4 out of 100. That's how bad I was, and so I very gracefully then bowed out of physics.
Very good
And I'm so
decision.
bad at it.
But yeah, this would mean that so this has happened with a lot of people I know. So, and particularly like because your parents are like somewhat in again public figures. आपको ये भी बोला गया होगा, I think, यार आपके parents are this and how you this bad at studies. You should respect them. This thing. Like this has happened with so many people that I know. They get
I
this,
think मेरे
but
साथ उल्टा होता था, which is no matter how bad my grades were, people
right.
just wouldn't believe that I didn't have an aptitude for, say, maths or physics, which I never have had. And even now, when I'm calculating the bill, when I'm calculating the tip at a restaurant, I know कि
Right.
अगर एक left पे कर दोगे तो वो 10% हो जाएगा, and these are these tricks I use
Right.
to get by in life. But sometimes if I want to give like a 22% tip or 25, I will just then be
Right.
sitting there for a while.
Right.
But people project. The thing I've learned, Siddharth, over the last few years is that people project how they feel onto you, and there's only
Right.
so much that you can control in terms of people's perceptions of
Right.
of who you are.
Right. No, and that's a very interesting point, because and that's largely why I asked this question in the first place, because I think as readers people tend, and including me myself, right, I have tended to for a lack of a better word, dehumanize the author to the extent that you tend to think of them as perfect beings, right? Who have a particular set of opinions or perception, and they are generally perfect people. But it actually makes the reading process far more enjoyable to know that it's another human who's penning these thoughts down, right? Another human who struggles at maths and physics, right? Something along those lines. But without wasting any more time, I'd like to jump right to your book. And something right off the top of my head, I absolutely loved the way you wrote, particularly the way you ended your stories. And that's something that's stuck with me because I don't know if there was a deliberate choice that you made to end almost all of them on a largely, it actually goes beyond hanging, because a hanging point is where, there's just a twist and you're just waiting for resolution on either ends. But here it just stops one step short of that. You just don't know, like, even if I go right from the beginning of the first story itself, like, that text message doesn't really leave you on a very comfortable note, if I can put it that way, right? You don't either, it's not a, oh yes, they were in love or they were not in love. It's just, okay, there is, I mean, so was this a deliberate choice on your part to go with like something similar for across stories, or was it just how
Oh,
stories were playing out?
yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that question. I think sometimes you can tie up stories too neatly, and there is
Mm-hmm.
always the urge and the desire to tie up stories neatly so that there's a kind of quiet eureka moment, a quiet epiphany at the end where the reader is like, so
Right.
this is how it all comes together. And I was very tempted to do that. And I think the only story in which I did it was Breezy
Mm-hmm.
Blessings, actually, if you
Mm-hmm.
noticed. That
Right.
had a very complete ending where we can talk about that in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think even Are You Enjoying the title story, the ending
Mm-hmm.
is it's quite clear.
Right.
The emotional note on which it
Right.
ends is quite clear. But yes, I think that you know wouldn't necessarily call my endings anti-epiphanies, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
sense that there is a sense that the character is also yet to perhaps come to terms with what has happened, and that the
Right.
character is, I think, the best endings gesture at the beginning of a new opening, in a sense.
Right.
And if you look at the ending of A Life of Its Own Part 1, and
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the ending of Tomboy,
Mm-hmm.
where she's crying, and he
Right.
says, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "She's brave," referring to Nina, the other character. That to me was, now is Asha going to change her life? Is she going
Right.
to get out of this marriage? She's
Right.
moved by this other woman's honesty. So where is she
Mm-hmm.
going to go next? And
Right.
and that is sort of to your point, that it's a step right before hanging, which is the
Mm-hmm.
character now has to decide where they
Mm-hmm.
want to go. And I hoped, I don't know if I've actually been successful, but I hoped this was all gesturing at
Mm-hmm.
the possibility of new beginnings for these characters. And some of
Right.
the beginnings maybe, like for Mehak and Breezy Blessings, it's a
Mm-hmm.
loss of innocence, right? She's
Right.
saying, "Acha, so this is
Mm-hmm.
what is required of me. Aa jao
Mm-hmm.
मैदान में, मैं भी
हाँ,
मैदान में आ जाऊंगी."
जी.
So,
Right. And it's very interesting that you mentioned it, because I think one of the movies that I've always loved is this. I don't know if you've seen this movie. It's a Bollywood movie named Ek Mein Aur Ek Tu. It starred
acha,
Imran Khan and
really,
Kareena Kapoor. So the bit that I'm referring to is, at the start of the movie, the director just displays this small credit at the beginning that it reads the end, and right at the end of the movie it says the beginning, and it's a story about a character over 2 weeks.
yeah,
And it's exactly what you said, right? And that's, I think, that did stand out for a lot of your stories, that particularly the one that you mentioned, Tomboy, that it is a new beginning for the character, and it leaves a lot to the reader's imagination, and a lot for them to think about, particularly if they can link it back to their lives. But
exactly.
right, so, but on that note, something that not bothered me, what has gotten me thinking about the book, is that often you've written, like, a lot of your characters don't particularly fit within what we know about you, right, or you as a person. So I know that you have had a very interesting life, from at least from what I know,
Mhm.
and you would be able to offer a lot more perspective into life in Pakistan and growing up there. But it might be fair for a person to come by and say that, well, you speak for the Pakistani elite, or like a very comfortable life which reflects on your upbringing, and that doesn't preclude you from understanding, say, what a discriminated class might feel like.
Right.
But it does put a question, not a question, but it does let people think over those gray areas. So I mean, was there some research that, or what kind of research did you go about with, to the extent of writing about, say, from uh, I don't know, like a perspective for a woman who's struggling with her identity, or for a boy who's drawn towards like, in this
Yeah.
group of people who is somewhat fundamental in his beliefs, but not quite, I know,
So is your
not able
question,
to.
are you asking that how, so I have written about people who are different from me? Is that what you're saying?
Right. So what? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
How? Right.
So I think so I appreciate that. I mean, that's the whole point. A lot of people have said that it is the material reality of my characters is sort of uniform. And it's true that out of the 7 stories, I think certainly A Life of Its Own and Are You Enjoying are about the upper class. And I think there's a critique of that life in both the stories, because Farah in Life of Its Own is the outsider looking into Zibi's life, and she's constantly critiquing it. And at one point she says to Kashif, let's get out of this weird village and your weird as fuck family. Kehti hai, because she's the outsider looking in and she can see them for what they're like. So I did want to critique that element. But I also, campus politics, Siddharth, in India as in Pakistan, are really, they are the sites of a lot of interesting politics. A lot of, they're sort of these, they are sites of protest and of activity, and they can often be combustible, right? Because you have your left-wing politics, you have right-wing politics, and in a country like Pakistan, the majority of student politics is now sort of center-right conservative. And this is stuff I read about, like in state colleges and state universities, right? I'm not talking about elite private institutions, jo वैसे भी बहुत कम है at the level of higher education. About a month ago, 2 students who were in love, the girl proposed to the boy on campus at the Lahore University. And they subsequently embraced, and the university expelled them, saying that this was in violation of some unwritten code of conduct. Now, that is a real thing that happened in Pakistan. So I am observing all of this, and I am witness to this, and when stuff like this happens, it really gets under my skin, because I think that you should not police people and the ways in which people want to express love. You should not police people's bodies. You should not police people's ideas, especially if they are ideas around love and expressing, real sentiments that are not harming anyone. So a man for his time came sort of from, I wrote it, like started writing it 5 years ago, but it comes from my critique of a certain type of politics that seeks to police.
Right.
And then you just, the budding fundamentalist का जो mindset था, फिर you work so hard to get into it. It takes years.
No, and so it's very fascinating when you mention this, and that just like very conveniently offers me a pivot to something that I wanted to talk about. Because when you mentioned, campus politics and policing of people, that is also something that we're seeing here in India as well, right?
Yes.
And this is a very cliche topic which almost we talk about all the time, but somehow don't talk about at all, is how similar our cultures are, and even how even though we've had unique political developments in terms of how we've reached where we are as countries, a lot of our core fundamental politics still revolves around the same, right? I mean, you truly have right wing parties who are going after moral policing, and there's quite similar incidents to what you mentioned, which have happened here as well, and like even for some even worse. And both country, politicians would love to call each other out on this, but and that's something that stood out for me in the book as well, right? A lot of the experiences that you spoke about, like something about Farah's relationship, not just as a unique situation as of a person who's looking in as an outsider, but just a daughter-in-law adjusting with say a rather more elite family, right? And the kind of pressure she's going through, or the different kind of relationships that you spoke about. It's very fascinating because they are so similar. It is unbelievable how similar those experiences are, right? In your opinion, or in your, I don't know, you've been to India a few times, as you mentioned, right? Where is it that where do you think we are failing at certain points of time to break past it? Because I'm sorry for this long rant, but this is something that I
No.
personally that I have experienced as well. I have a few friends from Pakistan who I've met when doing this, through certain events, and I have always, in each and every interaction with them, walked away with just astonishment at how am I, how is my country like designed to not like them? Like why is it that? Because they're practically like me.
Yeah.
So, but I do also realize that there is, at certain level, like after a point of time, the higher you move up in society, there is a certain schism that develops. What do you think is failing? Where are we failing as human beings on either sides of the borders to actually, finally be able to have
It's a
some
really
sort of
thoughtful question, and
resolution?
I'm really glad you asked. I think this goes back many, many years. It goes back literally to partition. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you had you had the British, who were colonial force, who very arbitrarily carved up
Mm-hmm.
a big mass of land. Um, and then Pakistan was born and India was born. I'm not going to get into that because this is a literary
Right.
podcast. We're not here
Mm-hmm.
to talk about um, history as such. But I think what happened was then that the Pakistani power and political elite had to develop its identity in relational opposition to India. We were
Mm-hmm.
everything India was not. India was Hindu, Pakistan was Muslim majoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of the main. And the irony is, of course, Siddharth, that Muslims were in danger,
Mm-hmm.
were in economic peril at the time of partition and were being subjugated as a minority in India. And then Pakistan and India, then partition happened, and so this was supposed to be a place. Pakistan was supposed to be a place of refuge for
Mm-hmm.
a minority that had been oppressed. And then fast forward to 40 years later, where Pakistan is also oppressing its own minorities, right? I'm
Right.
not going to shy away from saying that. I mean, Christian workers who work in brick kilns are treated terribly and sometimes attacked and lynched. And
Right.
the way with certain laws of the state are used to settle land disputes in which they come down harder on minorities. Anyway, so I think that the political elites of both countries instrumentalized um,
Mm-hmm.
their the fact that that now they were separated, and so it helps the Pakistani establishment to vilify India, and similarly in India now it helps the Indian establishment to say that we are everything Pakistan is not.
Right.
Because look, if India and Pakistan, if we became friends, if the borders were open, then
Mm-hmm.
it would delegitimize this entire propaganda and history about how we should never be friends, right? It would
Right.
delegitimize all these toxic narratives that
Right.
our countries and our leaders have created to vilify the other.
Right.
When you vilify the other person, you are exerting power over them. You are saying that
Mm-hmm.
I am putting you in this box and you are
Okay.
no greater than this box. You are enacting violence upon their identity. And that is terrible. And I think that without getting too sociological about this right now, I just want to say that people to people contact, Siddharth, like
Mm-hmm.
the reason I agreed to do this podcast is because I admire your work, but also it gives me tremendous joy to be sitting across from you, albeit on Zoom, and having this conversation with you because you are human. You are so human to me right now, and I am human to you right now. And the minute you sees the other person as with you're seeing my house right now, I'm seeing your bookshelf right now, I'm seeing the fact that
Right.
Siddharth wears glasses, that
Right.
Siddharth has a different profession at night, that Siddharth is X years old.
Mm.
I will. You are now. You refuse to be unknown to me, and the minute somebody
Right.
refuses to be unknown to you, you can't vilify them. And I think that is actually the beauty and power of literature. We tell
Right.
stories. I've told this story about Pakistanis, young urban Pakistanis in Pakistan, and now they are not. They refuse. My characters refuse to be unknown to you, and I think that's
Mm.
very powerful.
Right. And like it's the exact point that you made, right? Like I'm here sitting in Mumbai reading a book about a urban Pakistani's woman, like her perspective about what she's seen or her characters gives me an insight into what life is in Pakistan, and that is exactly what led to this question, right? Like this delegitimizing, or in that sense humanizing of people, is, I think, the most important way forward. But like I would just like to like
Yeah.
take a step back and go back to the book. because
Okay.
something that you mentioned just drew me back into it. You mentioned, and this was right at the beginning of your question. I'm sorry, but this has been in my mind, on my mind ever since you mentioned it. You mentioned the British Raj, and that just takes me to ZB's comment about it, how she has fond memories from the British Raj time. But so that's something that I noticed, right? There are a lot of your characters, even though they might not be the major characters of the story. Like of course ZB was a major
Yeah.
character, but say in the Are You Enjoying, like her father, right? He's a one someone from the Pakistani elite, but not a
Yeah.
major player in the story. So are these people from your life, like people you've grown up observing and like just taken up some traits or something or the other and just juxtapose them into something,
So
or or
yeah, I
just
mean,
like something out of creation?
I think I think that's a question a lot of people ask, and while I think it's a very natural question, I think it's a question that authors don't like because it completely immediately limits
Mhm.
it's saying, is this from your life? And I completely understand that that's a lot
Right.
of the interest comes from there. It's like, acha sune, wo aapki ammi ka character to nahi hai? Or like, oh, is that what happened in your life? Did you do that? Is
Yeah.
that on set? Was a direct? Did you have that experience with the director? I
Mhm.
completely understand where that's coming from, but it doesn't
Right.
doesn't let the book breathe and have a life of its own
Right.
if
Right.
one is like, oh yeah, that. So what I'll say to that is that I'm open to the sights and sounds and smells of life. When I am
Right.
on a set in Karachi, I am very alert to the power dynamics that are playing out. I am
Right.
usually have a very close relationship with the makeup artist, because the makeup
Mm.
artist is hovering around you with their brushes and they're gossiping in your ear, and they have one ear to the crew and they have the other ear in the makeup room, and so they're
Right.
sort of ferrying this information back and forth. So details like that are definitely, they
Mm.
come from my life. Having my pores open to life playing out around me is
Mhm.
how I approach it. And
Right.
sure, I've had maternal aunts, and my mother is now an elected MP in Punjab, and I am
Mhm.
surrounded by these strong matriarchs who are
Mhm.
inspiring. But ZB is a bit of a, I don't want to say caricature, but she's a tragic comic faux kind of, with her use of one has vastly improved the lives of the poor. She's a kind of, it paints her with
Right.
this, shrouds her in this tragicomic faux gravitas.
Right.
So that is all from my imagination and sort of what I find playful and interesting.
Mm.
Yeah,
Not
my mother doesn't talk
like
like that.
no, that's reassuring to know after a point in time, I guess. But so you sort of answered my question, and I think I didn't communicate my question well, because that was not what I was implying. Like, I mean, I did not mean that you picked up correct characters from your life and just put them in your book.
Right.
But and it's absolutely wonderful to know that these actually came out of your imagination. But because from what I understand, a lot of authors, what they end up doing is that they notice, like even caricatures for that matter, it's just अच्छा एक कोई दूर के चाचा हैं जो ऐसी बात करते हैं, and you just
Bilkul.
find that trope funny, and you just put it in as part of something. And that was something which I was asking, and
No,
which
and
you sort of answered.
I think you're absolutely right.
Right.
We occasionally cannibalize and metabolize our own relatives and our own friends.
Right.
We do. And if for example, there's something that happens on the set of a show and a particular actor, for example, in Breezy Blessings, she says
Mm.
that the senior actresses said, hmm. There were two
Mm.
types of hmms. There was one that was like an acknowledgement and an agreement, and then there was a which was a
Mm.
rebuff. And
Right.
that's certainly something I've noticed, and that's directly from my lived experience. So बिल्कुल होता है, हम metabolize हर वक्त कर रहे होते हैं content.
अच्छा, तो अब मुझे आपसे एक बात पूछनी थी कि every writer has a writing process, right? What has been yours? And particularly, what I'm interested in is that I don't know a lot about your work as a journal. Like, when you work with the Wall Street Journal, although that would have been completely different from how you write fiction, right?
Yes.
Particularly when you're writing non-fiction work. So, what was the difference in the process between the two? Like, did you adapt, like, say, a mechanical one for non-fiction and just like a more flowing form for writing fiction? जब मन किया तब लिखा, or was it
बिल्कुल.
just like one of those disciplined things that अच्छा नहीं मैं 9 से 12 लिखूंगी kind of thing?
हाँ. नहीं, I think सिद्धार्थ, ये जब मन किया तब लिखा very much was my it is my method, actually, because you know there's an element of play and there's an element
Right.
of delight in this, and if you take that element of play away, you take that element of love away, then art is not art. तो फिर ये नौकरी हो जाती है. And नौकरी in a sense है, because I had to finish the book, I had to edit it, I had to work with my editor's suggestions. So at some point, after you've written the first draft and you've sent, after a certain point, it does become very methodical. But I think you have to begin with something that is inspiring, because it has to, you have to stay with it then, right? There are some false starts. So there are 3 stories that didn't make it into the collection. That were about different things. There was one story about a man who's sort of like a chief minister. It didn't go anywhere because I didn't really have, I couldn't get into his head. It didn't go anywhere. There was a story from the point of view of a child, which I thought was pretty good, but it was very stream of consciousness and it felt a little out of place with the other stories. So we didn't put it in the collection. But that element of play is really important. And when I was an editor at the Wall Street Journal, it was very methodical. It was very, I was using a different toolkit, which was editing, pruning out things that don't make any sense, making sure that clarity was key, right? I was an editor, so I had to make sure that my authors who would send in articles, clarity was key. In fiction, Siddharth, I would say it's the opposite. I think too much clarity in fiction kills the mood. I think too much clarity is actually a killer. So those are two very different toolkits.
You're absolutely right. Clarity is, I think, the enemy of fiction there. Like, I think that's the beauty of fiction and books in general, right? I think personally, because I started reading as a kid and I used to read fiction a lot more. Now I read a good balance between the two. What stood out for me as a reader was the ability to imagine the world, right? I mean, the author does create a world, but then it is certain ambiguity as to how that person is or how that situation is or what that conversation is or how it plays out is what actually draws readers into it, right? You're weaving this entire world in your head and you just get so lost in it. And I think clarity was, I don't know, I completely agree with you there. But so now that you've been an editor, right, albeit for a non-fiction piece of work, is that something that weighed on you when you were writing your book? So like, was there at any point of time aap likh rahe the or and it just went through your head, you know what, oh, if I were an editor, I wouldn't probably like this?
Yeah, there are many times. I mean, there's a lot of Urdu words. The syntax of the way in which my characters speak is quite broken. Roshan in Busy Blessing says, lots of comments coming on my Facebook. Then I was relaxed. You know, he doesn't say then I was relaxed. He just says then I was relaxed. And I thought to myself, chalo, Western audience ke liye relaxed likh do. But maine kaha, nahi yaar, wo relaxed kabhi na kare, because he's, you know, wo bolta nahi hai aise. So channeling the subjectivity of my characters was more important to me, I think, than being accessible or being understood. I think if I wanted to be understood above all, I would have written a pamphlet, or I would have written an op-ed, or I would have written a guest essay for the Caravan or the Hindustan Times or whatever. The reason we write fiction is to convey a world, right, and to convey these characters and all their subjectivity. And I think keeping the idiosyncrasy of my characters was more important to me than being a good editor in my head. So I let a lot of things go.
And you know what? That actually makes a lot of sense, because one of my favorite authors is Anuja Chauhan, and something that I really loved about her work when I first read it, like about a decade ago, was the fact that she didn't hesitate to use Hindi while writing an English book, right? She would write about, now that I can't say anything off the top of my head, but you do. It's quite similar to how you're writing. I mean, for the fact that you would write about salwar kameez and not just describe it in English, right? What that piece of work is.
Like a tunic with a loose cotton
trouser. Exactly. That just does it. I think it takes away from the taste of the book. And
imagine, Siddharth, if I had said, if a character had said, please pass the gulab jamun, comma, or like it said, Mira passed Siddharth the gulab jamun, comma, a deep fried ball of milk curd. Can you imagine?
Yeah, exactly. And something exactly my point. Like ये बिल्कुल सही आपने सही पकड़ा कि ऐसे
वेस्ट में कोई ये तो नहीं कहता ना कि a donut, comma, a ring shaped deep fried sweet. Nobody says that, because there's a power, there's a history of power, right? The West exports that culture to us, and we are all too familiar with donuts, for better or for worse. Right? But they are not familiar with chanas and so on. But मैंने कहा कि नहीं, कोई बात नहीं, Google कर ले आप.
And this is something very interesting, because I think I'd spoken to an author, a translator, in fact, on my podcast earlier, who translated an old Bengali work into English. And one of the peculiar things that we noticed was, and spoke about, was how English often is very restrictive for subcontinent writers or even translators for that matter, because it doesn't capture a lot of the culture and power dynamics of the language that we speak on the subcontinent, right?
Totally.
Something as basic as mama, mami, or mosaji, mosi.
Mhm.
For English, they're just uncle and aunt, but there is just so much more to it than the translation that comes out, right?
बिल्कुल.
बट मीरा, आप मेरे को एक बात बताइए कि आपकी जो किताब है, आप जब लिखते हैं, what is the most unique or like the most quirky uh, part of your writing process? Like,
Yeah, I
this
actually didn't
ये
answer
क्या कर
that.
रही
Sorry. Huh. So, Siddharth, basically, my golden hour, so to speak, is the minute I wake up. So, before I had any interaction or interfaced with anyone in my room, or I wake up,
जी
I will probably have a glass of hot water. That's something I do first thing in the morning. And then I get to my laptop without eating anything, without showering. I get to my laptop, and that unbroken clarity that you have early in the morning or whenever you wake up, it could be 10 a.m. also. Beyond that, it gets a little, I don't usually sleep too late. That unbroken clarity of thought that you have is so, I find it only comes in the mornings.
right
So I will wake up and I will write for 4 hours. If somebody is kind enough to make me breakfast in the interim, usually nahi hota, मैं खा लूंगी a toast with something or the other. I'll make myself a
right
toast and bring it to my laptop and then eat it. But sometimes I go without eating. Like I'll just write. And then suddenly I'll be like, oh, it's noon. I better make myself something to eat. And those are my best hours. And then, at like a post lunch, I'm in lethargic and maybe
right
go to the gym. So I find that the unbroken kind of there's this web around you in the morning when you wake up. And if you can utilize that, I certainly do. That's when I write best. So Ratko, I almost never write at night. There are people who work best at night. A lot of
right
moms, a lot of dads work really well at night when the kids are asleep and they can finally
right
concentrate. But I don't have any children, so I use the morning hours, and they are really the best.
right No, I'm just taken aback by like 4 hours of writing in the morning that requires a lot of like dedication and concentration. That's absolutely this thing. Like I
Yeah.
personally I mean I like working in the morning as well as night. So but my thing is I can't like ever work more than 2 or 3 hours with like complete focus. I need like a
अच्छा.
break after
हाँ.
that point of
नहीं,
time.
मतलब break आप ले लें आप मतलब you look
जी
around, you walk around, you have a banana, but it
जी
doesn't not more than that.
जी
And
but
no time scrolling on the internet.
हाँ जी वो that becomes like a genuine thing that we have begun enforcing. Like I think over the past year, especially during the pandemic, it just
Yeah,
became so easy to just like while away time on social media, right?
totally.
Right. So that just comes in. But Mira, I like to take a step back from you as a writer to you as a reader, right? Because
Okay.
you did deal with books when you were working with the Wall Street Journal, which just makes me think that you definitely would have been a very voracious reader. So what's your story with books? Where did you start? Like, was it your parents who introduced you? Did you just bump into a library? I don't know what got you.
My parents tried really hard. In fact, when we were little, my father used to say, "I'll bribe you if you read it. Like I'll give you money if you read a book. Not
Right,
bribe, but he used to say कि मैं तुम्हें इतने पैसे दूंगा if you read like an Enid Blyton or whatever." And at that time I wasn't interested in books because it's something you can never force upon anyone. Then
right,
Siddharth, when I was 15, I started reading, like when I was 13, 14, I started reading Archie comics. I remember my school ke baad Archie comics leti thi, and they would be very expensive and I would buy one. I remember jo moti wali digest hoti thi, it was for like
double digest.
325 rupees, the double digest, 325 rupees, and I would come home and I would eat my lunch and I would read it. And then the book that really actually made literature come alive for me was The God of Small Things. And this is a real cliche also because it's been a seminal book for so many people now, but it's the truth.
Right.
The God of Small Things, the first time I read it, I loved it, but I didn't quite understand it because there's so much class dynamics, there's power, there's so much going on there. But then I read it again and I was just blown away. What Arundhati Roy is able to do with language. She just reinvents language in that book.
Right.
And I was so moved by that book. And in Rahel and Asta and Amu and Baby Kochama and Velutha and all the characters, I thought And just she's a beautiful, stunning writer.
Absolutely. Like for
Yeah,
me,
so
I
that
think.
book,
Sorry, please go on.
no, that book made me love books at that early stage in my life. I must have been 15 or 16.
Right. So for it's interesting you mentioned the God of Small Things, because I have a very peculiar experience with it as well while reading it.
Uh-huh.
I read it quite late in life, not late, but compared to when you read it. I think I
Mhm.
read it when I was 19 or 20. I think that's when I
Okay.
first read it. And by the end, it was one of those things. Or like it's God of Small Things. You have to read it. One of those. It
Yeah.
had been on my reading list, but I wanted. And I found myself like when I was reading it for the first half, or I think first 60% of the book, I was reading it because of I liked the way it was written, but I wasn't too enamored by the book. I wasn't too sold on the book. I was just flowing along with the book. And I
Right.
don't know whether it was something intentional on her part, but I think suddenly, I think halfway through the book is the movie theater scene, right? Where
Ah,
right,
that,
and I read that and I just flipped a page and I didn't even realize I had tears coming down my eyes. And that's when I realized the magic of her writing, because it's so subtle. It just comes crashing down on you in one go. And
that
yeah,
is
like
that's one of the most powerful scenes in that book with the
exactly.
orange drink, lemon drink man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And yeah, it just I know. I mean, I was taken aback by how how encaptured an author can keep me, right? I mean, till that point of time, I had no idea how gripped I was, how much involved I was with the book, and how much the writing was affecting me. And then all of in one second, it just made a lot of sense. But I completely get what you mean. But as much as this is a cliched question to ask, has there been, like, apart from the God of Small Things, were there any other books that really impacted you as a person, who made you who you are today?
Yeah. There's this book called The Line of Beauty by this British author Alan
Mm-hmm.
Hollinghurst, and it won the
Mm-hmm.
Booker Prize, I believe, in 2004. And it
Mm-hmm.
is set in Thatcher era England, so it's set in the 80s, and it's about an upper class British family, but told from the point of view of an outsider. So
Mm-hmm.
Nick Guest is a lodger in this family, and he finishes up at Oxford, and he comes to London to become a lodger in this family. And he notices all the dynamics inside the family, and then of course he is also his own journey, being a closeted gay man,
Right.
in 80s England, and his various sort of escapades and his desires and yearnings. And I think at the level of the sentence, it is one of the most beautiful books I have read. It's called The Line of Beauty,
Mm-hmm.
also. And it's funny. Alan Hollinghurst has a real gift for dialogue. It's one of the
Right.
funniest books I've ever read, and I think it is probably. I think God of Small Things. मेरे बचपन में मेरी favorite किताब होती थी, but I
Mm-hmm.
think The Line of Beauty is probably the book that has impacted me the most.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend it to you.
No, I think I'll add
And
it to
all of
my
the
reading
listeners
list
are
soon.
watching.
Yes, I would definitely do that.
And
Uh,
the reason I like it so
जी,
much is because the narrator, the protagonist, Nick, and again, this is Alan Hollinghurst, nothing escapes him. You know, a look on someone's face,
right.
like the way in which a woman's laugh rings hollow to the
Mm-hmm.
narrator, the interior and outside, the inside and outside architecture of a
Mm-hmm.
house, but also the interior of a person, and the
Mm-hmm.
way the way furniture is shaped, the way moods are shaped, nothing escapes him. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like a gorgeous, gorgeous book.
No, and that's something, right? Like an observant author is just so powerful, because he or she can just like play with the reader so much, and like if they have a gift for it. I mean, this like so I wasn't very sold on when you were talking about the book earlier, but I think when you described the fact that how he works as an author is something that actually makes me want to read the book more.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Mira, heading towards the end of the interview, I have a question about how did you exactly transition towards writing fiction? Was this a lifelong goal, or was it just something that just happened that you want it just happened? Yeah.
As I said earlier, like I think I always used to enjoy, the only subject I was good at was English and writing stories, and so I
Right.
always knew that I had a gift for storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started acting in Pakistan, I realized that there's a lot of rich material in the day-to-day lives of people, because it got me out of my little hole in Lahore. I would go to Karachi, I would meet all kinds of people, and then I realized that okay, I think I can tell like a few stories. And then Siddharth, I would email myself snippets to take the pressure off. ऐसा नहीं था कि मैंने Microsoft Word document खोली और उसका title लिखा, short stories or whatever, like book or whatever. I would just email myself observations to just be like, these are just my observations. And then the first story I wrote was Breezy Blessings. So that was my first story, and then the others came. And once I had written the first draft of Breezy, then I opened up a Microsoft Word document, and I don't know what I called it. Probably, I think Breezy Blessings ka title mujhe shuru mein aa gaya tha, it came to me. And then I started just writing. So let me ask you a question, since so much of this conversation was about craft and kind of backstory. So out of the 7 stories, which story resonated with you the most?
So, in fact, there would be 2 which resonated with me. The first one would be Are You Enjoying, which resonated a lot with me because, particularly because it dealt with the mental health of the protagonist, and that is something that I just tended to associate a lot more with, about how confusing things can be in those kinds of situations. And the other one that resonated with me was Tomboy, not particularly because of for my association with the characters, but that is because that is a thought that has often crossed my mind, and particularly because of the fact that I think I liked how poetic it was. They wanted to escape from the clutches of society, but to do that, they had to undergo one of the most oldest forms of societal listening. So yeah, I think those were the 2 books that very particularly stood out, like stories which stood out for me. And like again, and those are, I mean, there's no literary critical reason that I can offer you apart from just
But
I
I really
associate with those
appreciate
books.
that. It's that you related to them and you thought they were related to the suffocation, maybe, that not that you have experienced it, but you understood at some level Sony's predicament. And Tomboy was, they're escaping from the oppression of tradition, expectations, basically.
Right.
So,
And like it's one of those things, right? I think just that fact that just to be with someone from the other gender, then society would leave them alone. So ठीक है, ये compromise करके, and it just works out in a very odd way. It just right, something that made me think a lot more. But now that your book's out, it's getting rave reviews, and like it's really making waves. I mean, I really recently saw, I think Malala recommended it for her book club, which was like great and huge. and it's actually making a lot of waves here in India as well. Like, I mean, not to brag in any sort of way whatsoever, but I heard of your book not through a publisher or anyone who contacted me for the podcast. Right? I found out about your book through like just browsing on Instagram, through people like I saw someone post about it whose opinions on books I think I respect. Like that's the people who are on my Instagram, right? So I saw that, and then I stumbled upon your book, and it seemed something like really interesting. And I happened to mention that I would be doing this podcast with you to a friend who had again heard of the book and heard good stuff about it. So it's clearly that well, your writing is working. I mean, it's something that is
I'm very
appealing
grateful,
to people.
Siddharth. I really had no idea that India has caught on, and I'm delighted to hear that young people like yourself are reading it and engaging with it. Honestly, like, I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here, but यही होता है ना, जब आप when you, especially India Pakistan का जो है, I can't come to India, I can't come and tell my story. So I've written a book, and if my book is telling stories of regular Pakistanis who have aspirations just like you do, just like I do, just like regular people do, it is such a gift to be received with the love that you guys have received this book with. So I'm incredibly grateful, and it makes me very happy to hear that the stories that don't get told in these conventional narratives, the way we started off this conversation, the कहानियां जो दबाई जाती हैं, अगर वो आप लोगों को पसंद आ रही हैं और मैं लिख सकती हूँ, तो there's no greater privilege than that.
नहीं, एंड आपने जो कहा वो एक्चुअली बहुत ही एक सुंदर पॉइंट है कि आई थिंक आर्ट एंड कल्चर इन जनरल is such an amazing thing because it bonds people across the world in such beautiful ways. Like for that matter, मुझे पता है, something that I have noticed, and I know a lot of people who watch Pakistani television shows, right? I think it started, I'm not very familiar with that world, but एक 2016 या 15 में I think there was a very famous show, which I'm forgetting the name of it, which I think is available on Netflix as well. उस show से like there was this kickoff in India where a lot of people started watching a lot more Pakistan.
Hamsafar. Are you talking
I
about the
think
Mahira Khan and Fawad Khan drama series?
yes.
Yeah, but that was
The
I think 2011. It was called Hamsafar. Yeah.
Haji. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not sure of the timeline, but there's something I have particularly noticed, and like I'll tell you why I noticed this. So I happen to know a few like relatives who are like generally fundamentalists, like not fundamentalists, but thode cutter views, like Pakistanis don't like us kind of people. But they started enjoying art and culture, and I've seen their views soften over time because of like for them that was an eye opener. कि अच्छा उनकी जिंदगी भी हमारी जैसी ही है, their issues are also very right. So I mean that was like for me it was a very revolutionary thing to watch in actual life. But like just to sum this up, आपकी कोई अगली किताब का आपने कुछ सोचा है? What do you want to write next? Can we expect like a novel coming up?
Yeah,
Or
I
like
think I'm going to write a novel. In fact, I have to write a novel. So I haven't yet started. I haven't put pen to paper or fingertip to keyboard yet. I will in the near future. I just want Are You Enjoying to get out of my system first. It's still in my system
Right.
in some way because I'm doing this with you and I'm talking about it and
Right.
thinking about it every day. So inshallah, my novel bilkul likhungi. I think the protagonist will probably be a woman. Is my sense. अब कहानी क्या होगी वो मुझे खुद पता चलेगा जब मैं लिखूंगी और मैं I'll stumble and I'll go down these rabbit holes and then I'll come emerge from the rabbit hole and be like अच्छा नहीं ये गलत है इधर जाओ फिर मैं इधर जाऊंगी. And I think आज मैं ट्विटर पे पढ़ी थी सिद्धार्थ and it really I think ये बड़ी जरूरी चीज है. It's kind of said a little bit tongue in cheek, but somebody said on Twitter कि it is important to not know what the hell you're doing. And I think that is such an important thing, हमें बताया जाता है कि बेटा अच्छी job करो. And of course यार मतलब those of us who have the luxury and the privilege to not do day jobs, मैं वो बात नहीं कर रही, but as a concept, to just be okay with uncertainty. I think इतना ज़्यादा माँ बाप से भी pressure होता है, society से भी होता है to just like know what you're doing. What is your 3-year plan, बेटा? Like क्या आपके plans है? आपको तो पता है South Asian families में कितना होता है. And I think sometimes it's, especially I would restrict this to fiction, and I'd say that in fiction, it's uncertainty is such a huge part of it. And if you are okay with uncertainty, then you'll probably be a good writer. But if you are constantly trying to, control is a part of narrative. You have to control your narrative. You have to write the beginning and middle and end yourself. But there's a lot of failing. Right. So I think it's good to be okay with failing and existing in mystery and not having answers to things. Right. And I actually, one last thing that I will say. Somebody asked me the other day, कि भाई fiction का मकसद क्या है? And what I want to leave all of you people who are watching this, and something that I've discovered while I've been promoting my book, is that I think good fiction shouldn't set out to solve problems. But good fiction should ask the questions intelligently.
That's something. Wow. Okay, I am quite speechless at that.
No,
because okay, very honestly, I think that's something that I resonate with in a lot of your short stories as well. Like, as I think it just pivots us back to what we started off while discussing. A lot of them just, I think, end on those notes. They're asking questions intelligently, right, rather than answering things for me, which, as you said, like it serves the purpose of fiction very beautifully, right? It makes, right, I think a book that has made me think a lot more about where I am in life and what I am doing, or what I'm thinking about things, or what my perspectives should be about things is something that I'm totally in love with, and which is what your book did. So yeah. Anyway, thank you for joining us, Mira. This was absolutely wonderful doing this. Thank you for taking out the time to record this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And I know that we also went down certain rabbit holes about politics and history, but I'm glad we did, because, you can't have a conversation about literature, certainly an Indian and a Pakistani sitting across, without really addressing the elephant in the room, which is
जी
कि भाई ये क्यों इतना artificial hatred create किया हुआ है हमारे मुल्कों ने. So I'm
Right.
glad we addressed that, and thank
Right.
you also for having me, Siddharth.
Right. No, and but that was one of the best things why I started this podcast, because exactly at this point, like I would not want to have had just a literary conversation with you, because right, you are a human being, you are an author as well, but there is a lot more to who you are, and that's what the readers would also want to know. So yeah, thank
Yeah,
you for coming.
thanks, and I look
Yes.
forward to I look forward to seeing you soon, maybe in real
Yes.
life. Take care.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed that podcast, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Like this video, share, subscribe, and spread the word among all your friends and all fellow bibliophiles who you think might enjoy such further conversation with authors or poets about their thoughts and their writing process. Also, check us out on Instagram at the rate Kitabi Karwan, where we post about books, our experiences reading them, talking to authors, having live sessions, and a lot more stuff which any bibliophile would enjoy. Thank you so much for listening.